If we look at the state of the PMO manager, your average PMO manager, there's a lot going on. They might be concerned about, and my thing here, so let me try something. Can you believe they launched another initiative? So there's usually the PMO is looking at a portfolio of projects, and all these initiatives are being launched. There's not enough people to get all this done. The PMO is trying to help get the organization prepared to launch a bunch of projects in a portfolio. The X25 project was supposed to be done by now. Things get delayed. Nobody's updating the system. I think this is typical. Usually when I do this live, I get a show of hands from the audience, and the hands always go up with a lot of these situations. Lastly, this methodology was supposed to help. So a lot of people implement fancy methodologies or tools or different things, and then still there's issues. And a lot of it is organizational, but we'll take a look at what some of the things are that cause all these. But meanwhile, executives want to know, and this is certainly an inquisitive group, isn't it? Executives want to know things like, are we in prime position to beat our competitors? And is our work portfolio addressing what's really important? Are we making the best use of our people? I mean, these are the things that the executives care about. Actually, there was a recent survey from Gartner that was talking about the state of the PMO, and they were talking about business executives were surveyed on what they envisioned that the PMO should be doing, and there's a huge gap between what most PMOs actually are doing. And a lot of it is around things like this. They want more from the PMO in terms of making the best use of our people. Are we addressing the important things? More strategic. And we're going to learn more about that today and how to really accomplish that. But meanwhile, the PMO is getting buried with responsibility. And the impossible PMO dream for those Don Quixote fans is things like implementing change and demonstrating value, developing metrics, appeasing stakeholders, influencing project managers, improving delivery, enabling innovation, improving throughput, optimizing resources, and if that isn't enough, providing alignment as well. So, I mean, this is a tall order. This is a lot of things that the PMO could be offering the organization, and some of them are offering this to organizations, but it's mainly elusive to be able to accomplish all of these things, and it's a tall order. Yet we're going to learn today that there is a way to get this done, and we're going to take a look at somebody who's actually done all these things. Of course, your first response is probably like Dr. McCoy in Star Trek, damn it, Jim, I'm a PMO director, not a magician. That's probably, now if only if it was this easy, like these fish here whose strategy is just swimming around in circles, it's a little bit easier than most people have in organizations. So we search for something new. We look for methods and tools, and we look for answers and silver bullets. And some things work a little bit, but still we struggle with the chaos of not enough resources and projects going haywire and delays and things like that. Now, Harry Truman had a great quote. He said, there's nothing new in this world except the history you do not know. And I think that's absolutely true, and we're going to see that firsthand today. Let's talk about Napoleon. You're thinking, okay, why Napoleon? What's up with Napoleon? Usually, again, when I do this live, I usually ask for a show of hands or for thoughts on what people think of when they hear Napoleon. Most people think, okay, short guy, big ego, dictator, hands always in a shirt, and the old the cliches that you hear about Napoleon. So we're going to dispel a few myths right off the bat. First of all, Napoleon was 5'7", which was average height at the time in France. Actually, Davy Crockett, who is legendary, big, tall Davy Crockett, was actually shorter than Napoleon. If you ever go to the Alamo and look at the the historical records and everything. So Napoleon actually was average height, but of course, he was in a war with the British, and it was probably the world's biggest smear campaign. So through all the cartoons and everything, they made him out to be the little dictator, and a lot of that's held true in the history books. Ever hear the saying, it'll cost you an arm and a leg? Where that comes from is if you look at any of the old paintings, even if you look at paintings of George Washington or any of from the 1700s, 1800s, a lot of times you'll see that the limbs are hidden. Either they're not in the picture at all or they're hidden behind a shirt or something. It's because it cost more money, believe it or not, and took more time for painters to draw limbs. So they try to avoid even like one less limb would save a lot of time. So that was really standard, and that's where that came from. And that's where the expression came from, it'll cost you an arm and a leg, because from the paintings. And so if you look at a lot of paintings around that time, that was typical. If anything, Napoleon's stance was usually walking around with his arms behind his back. That's how he typically walked around. This was just something that he did for paintings, which was customary at the time. Napoleon's goal, for those who don't know, was to create a federation of countries similar to today's European Union, except he was 200 years ahead of his time. And he wanted to end hereditary monarchy. He felt people shouldn't be kings and queens based on privileges of birth or have rights based on privileges of birth. It should be a meritocracy. It should be based on whether you've earned it and whether you've won the support of the public and things like that. So he fought for that. He created a constitutional setup in France. Now, needless to say, England and Russia stood a lot to lose there with their nobles and their hereditary monarchy, so they launched a huge war continuously against Napoleon. But really, that was the goal, and the time it was really a clash of ideals going on. It was basically democracy versus hereditary monarchies, and so naturally there was quite a bit of war and things like that. So that's some background. Now, of course, Napoleon wasn't perfect. He's probably just as famous for his defeats as he is for his many victories, although the defeats were very small in comparison to all of the accomplishments. But even he knew what he did wrong, and we're going to take a look at that. Why Napoleon? Why are we looking at Napoleon when it comes to project management and portfolio management and PMOs and resource management? First of all, as you'll see, and it'll become very clear soon, in all of these areas, Napoleon had unparalleled accomplishments. He also had a legendary organizational ability, and you'll see why. You'll see, how he was able to manage an entire empire with no Excel, no cell phones, nothing, but a tremendous organizational ability. And very well documented principles and methods. We know more about Napoleon than probably any character in history because of all that was documented. His soldiers wrote books. His personal secretaries wrote books. Napoleon wrote his memoirs and wrote his axioms down. His enemies wrote books. So we have so much written about how he did things and how he worked, and there's countless records of letters and all kinds of information. And records, and a lot of those we'll see referenced. Why Napoleon and project management? Really, at its core, project management is about overcoming challenges to achieve objectives. I mean, we know we have the PMI definition and all the fancy definitions, but at its core, that's what it's about. It's about overcoming challenges to achieve objectives, period. It's about planning and leading people and managing risks and understanding the terrain. And as we'll see, there's nobody that excelled at that more so than Napoleon. Why portfolio management? Well, if you look at portfolio management, that's really about selecting and balancing and aligning strategic objectives. That's what it's about which objective should we take on, how do we balance that with who we have available to do it, and make sure everything is aligned. And again, we'll see that Napoleon excelled at that. And Napoleon in resource management, well, resource management is about leveraging people to achieve objectives, and probably nobody was able to accomplish that more so than Napoleon, and all this will become very evident as you see some of the examples here. Now, we talked about Napoleon's accomplishments. He had unparalleled accomplishments. Well, these were in terms of being an administrator, being a builder, and being a leader. So it's, most people think Napoleon, they think, wars and battlefields and things like that, but really across all three spectrums of administration and construction and leadership, there were significant accomplishments. Let's take a brief history of his accomplishments. You'll get a feel for what I mean. So imagine we're looking at a PMO director's resume and say, oh, what have you done? So Napoleon, first of all, he won over 50 battles. That's a lot of battles. I would say, well, of course, we know he lost at Russia and at Waterloo. But aside from that, over 50 battles, and most of them, what people don't realize, most of them were defensive in nature. They were fighting against countries, like England, Russia, and other countries that were constantly invading France. They didn't want this whole idea of a dangerous idea of democracy and a whole new culture taking effect. So most of these were defensive, and most of them, to everybody's surprise, he ended up winning, and that's how the empire grew. And we're going to look at some strategies on how he did that and what that means to us. So we're not just going to look at history, but we're going to look at what does that mean to how we manage